There's a marketing director in Austin, Texas, making $165,000 a year. She drives a leased BMW X5, sends her two kids to a private school that costs $28,000 a year, and her family takes a beach vacation every single summer that runs close to $9,000. She posts the vacation photos. Her coworkers assume she's doing great. Her parents brag about her at family dinners. On paper, she's not just comfortable, she's winning. In reality, she has $1,400 sitting in checking, two credit cards creeping toward their limit, and if her car broke down tomorrow, the repair would go straight onto a card she's already struggling to pay down. According to a 2025 survey from LendingClub, 41% of Americans earning over $150,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck. Read that again. 41%. Not minimum wage workers. Not people in crisis or between jobs. People earning six figures, some of them well into six figures, with almost nothing left over by the time the next paycheck lands. The assumption most people carry is simple: earn more money, and your financial problems quietly disappear on their own. Get the raise, get the promotion, land the big title, and the stress just resolves itself. The data tells a completely different story. Income and financial security are not the same thing, and for a startling percentage of high earners, the two barely overlap at all. What you're witnessing has a name. Financial planners call it the high-income poverty trap, and it is quietly wrecking the finances of people who, from the outside, look like they have it all figured out. Today I'm going to show you exactly how this trap works, who falls into it without realizing, and why a bigger paycheck might actually be making your financial life worse instead of better. Before we get into this, if you're new here, hit subscribe to begin success. We break down exactly how money actually works. No fluff, just the real mechanics behind why people get stuck and how to get out. All right, let's get into it. Here's the belief almost everyone walks around with, and it sounds so obvious that nobody bothers to question it. More income equals more financial security. It feels like basic math. Earn more, save more, stress less. If that were true, the people with the highest salaries in this country should also be the people sleeping the best at night. So let's actually test that assumption against the data, because it falls apart almost immediately. A study from the Federal Reserve's 2025 survey of consumer finances found that nearly 1 in 3 households earning between $150,000 and $250,000 a year would struggle to cover an unexpected $2,000 expense without borrowing or selling something. Not a $20,000 emergency. $2,000. A transmission. A hospital copay. A broken water heater. These are households with income most Americans would consider life-changing, and a third of them are one bad week away from financial trouble. Separately, a 2024 Empower study found that 36% of six-figure earners described themselves as living paycheck to paycheck, and within that group, nearly a quarter said they have less than $500 in savings at any given time. Less than $500 on an income that puts them in the top 20% of all earners nationally. This is not a coincidence, and it's not a handful of unlucky outliers. This is a pattern with a name, and once you see it, you'll start spotting it everywhere. Financial planners call it the high-income poverty trap, a condition where rising income gets absorbed by rising expenses just as fast as it arrives. So the gap between what you earn and what you actually keep never widens, no matter how many promotions stack up. I want to be clear about something before we go further. This isn't about judging anyone for how they spend their money. Nobody sets out to build a financially fragile life. The trap works precisely because every individual decision inside it feels completely reasonable in the moment. The bigger house feels earned. The nicer car feels deserved. The private school feels like good parenting. None of these choices look reckless from the inside. But the assumption that income alone solves the problem has to die right here, because the data is unambiguous. Earning more money doesn't automatically build security. It just raises the stakes of every decision you make next, and for a huge percentage of high earners, those decisions are quietly working against them. So if income isn't the deciding factor, what actually separates the high earners who build real wealth from the ones who stay trapped at every income level? That's exactly what the research on actual wealthy people reveals next. Let's keep going, because the deeper you dig into this, the worse the picture gets, and each new data point exposes a different part of the same broken machine. Start with savings rate. According to Bureau of Economic Analysis data from late 2025, the personal savings rate across the country sits at just over 4%. That number barely moves when you isolate high earners specifically. A household bringing in $180,000 a year saving 4% is putting away roughly $7,200 annually, which sounds fine until you remember that household is also carrying a mortgage sized for that income, two car payments sized for that income, and lifestyle costs sized for that income. The cushion is thin no matter how big the number above it looks. Now look at debt. A 2025 report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that credit card balances among households earning over $100,000 grew faster over the previous 2 years than balances among households earning under $50,000. Read that again. The higher earners are accumulating debt at a faster pace than the lower earners. Rising income is not slowing borrowing down. In many cases, it's accelerating it, because access to higher credit limits simply raises the ceiling on how much lifestyle a paycheck can be stretched to support. Then there's net worth dispersion. Federal Reserve data shows that among the top 20% of earners by income, net worth varies by a factor of more than 10 between the bottom and top of that group. Two people earning nearly identical salaries can have wildly different financial outcomes, which tells you something the income number alone never could. Income explains far less about your financial future than most people assume. And geography makes it worse. A 2025 Smart Asset Cost of Living analysis found that in cities like San Francisco, New York, and Boston, a six-figure salary can functionally behave like a $60,000 salary once local housing and tax burdens are factored in. The number on the offer letter and the number that actually determines your financial flexibility are not the same number, and most people never run that translation. Stack these together and a pattern emerges that no single statistic could show on its own. Low savings rates, rising debt among the highest earners, massive net worth gaps within identical income brackets, geographic cost distortion eating paychecks alive before they even reach a bank account. None of these are isolated quirks. They're four separate symptoms of the exact same underlying disease, and understanding that disease requires looking at what the people who actually escape it are doing differently. So if income alone doesn't predict financial security, what does? For that, we need to stop looking at high earners who feel rich and start looking at people who are actually wealthy, because the research on actual millionaires tells a completely different story. The most cited research on this comes from Thomas Stanley and William Danko, who spent decades studying American millionaires directly instead of guessing based on what wealth looks like from the outside. Their findings, later updated and confirmed by Stanley's follow-up research with his daughter Sarah Stanley Fowler, consistently found the same surprising thing. Most millionaires don't look like millionaires. They drive used cars. They live in modest, often unremarkable homes. Many of them earn solidly upper-middle-class incomes, not extraordinary ones, and yet they've built seven-figure net worths while higher earners around them built nothing. Their research introduced a framework that explains exactly why, and it's one of the most useful tools you'll ever get for evaluating your own finances. It's called PAW versus UAW, prodigious accumulator of wealth versus under-accumulator of wealth. A PAW is someone whose net worth is significantly higher than what their income alone would predict. A UAW is someone whose net worth is significantly lower than what their income would predict, regardless of how much that income actually is. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Income level has almost nothing to do with which category you fall into. There are UAWs earning $400,000 a year with almost no net worth to show for it. And there are PAWs earning $70,000 a year who have quietly accumulated $800,000 or more. The marketing director from earlier, the one making $165,000 with $1,400 in checking, is a textbook UAW. Meanwhile, somebody earning a third of her salary could easily be sitting on more real wealth than she'll ever build at her current trajectory. This single distinction reframes the entire question we should be asking. The question was never, how much do you earn? The question is, how much of what you earn actually stays? A PAW doesn't necessarily earn more. They simply convert a higher percentage of every dollar that passes through their hands into assets instead of consumption year after year, without exception. Which means the high-income poverty trap isn't really about income at all. It's a UAW pattern hiding behind an impressive salary, and the only way to know which category you're actually in is to look honestly at what's happening underneath the income, not at the income itself. So let's look underneath it, starting with the psychology that keeps so many high earners stuck firmly in UAW territory despite knowing better. Here's something most people get wrong about the high-income poverty trap. It isn't a math problem. Nobody is failing at arithmetic. Every UAW we've talked about can do basic subtraction. They know what they earn and they know what they spend. The trap survives because it's operating on psychology, not on numbers, and three specific mechanisms are doing almost all of the damage. The first is lifestyle inflation. Every time income rises, spending rises to absorb it, almost automatically, like water finding its level. You get a raise, and within months, a slightly nicer apartment feels necessary. A slightly newer car feels deserved. The raise doesn't create margin. It just resets what normal feels like, and normal always expands to swallow whatever income provides it. The second is the hedonic treadmill, a well-documented psychological pattern where each upgrade delivers a brief spike in satisfaction that fades almost completely within weeks. The new car feels incredible for about a month. Then it's just the car you drive. The bigger house feels exciting for a season. Then it's just where you live, with a bigger mortgage attached to it permanently. The upgrade's cost is forever. Its emotional payoff is temporary. Most people keep chasing the next upgrade anyway, because in the moment, it genuinely feels like the answer. The third mechanism is social comparison pressure, and this one is sneakier than the other two because it operates almost entirely below conscious awareness. Humans don't evaluate their financial situation in isolation. They evaluate it relative to the people around them, coworkers, neighbors, friends from college who seem to be doing well. The marketing director earning $165,000 isn't comparing herself to someone earning $45,000. She's comparing herself to other directors, other parents at her kids' school, other people posting vacation photos. Against that specific comparison group, her spending doesn't feel excessive at all. It feels like keeping pace. Stack these three together, and you get a person making individually rational decisions inside an environment engineered to produce fragility. Lifestyle inflation resets the baseline. The hedonic treadmill demands the next upgrade once the last one goes stale. Social comparison makes the pattern feel normal rather than dangerous. None of it requires bad math. It just requires never stopping to ask whether the last 10 purchases actually made life better or just made the bank account smaller. This is why just budget better almost never works on its own. You can't out-discipline a pattern you haven't identified. You have to see the mechanism before you can interrupt it, and once you see exactly where the money is going, category by category, the trap stops being abstract and starts being fixable. Let's get specific, because abstract psychology is easy to nod along to and easy to forget. Real dollar figures are harder to ignore. Let's perform an autopsy on exactly where a high income actually goes, category by category. Start with housing. The marketing director's leased BMW aside, her mortgage runs $3,400 a month, roughly $40,800 a year, because the house was sized to match her income bracket rather than her actual needs. Financial guidelines generally recommend housing costs stay under 28% of gross income. Hers sits closer to 31%, which sounds like a small overage until you realize that extra few percent compounds every single month for the life of a 30-year loan. Next, vehicles. The leased BMW X5 runs $720 a month before insurance, which adds another $210. That's $930 a month, over $11,000 a year for transportation. A reliable used SUV could have handled the exact same job for a third of that cost, with the difference invested instead. Then there's the category most people underestimate entirely: recurring subscriptions and convenience spending. Streaming services, meal delivery, a gym membership rarely used, a cleaning service, premium app subscriptions nobody actively chose to keep. Individually, each one looks small: $15 here, $40 there. Added up across a household like hers, this category routinely reaches $600 to $800 a month, north of $7,000 a year, spent in increments too small to ever feel like a decision. And finally, the big one: private school tuition at $28,000 a year, plus the $9,000 annual vacation. Together, that's $37,000 a year flowing out of a single household for two specific lifestyle commitments that, once started, are almost impossible to walk back without feeling like you're failing your kids. Added up: housing overage, vehicle costs, subscription creep, tuition, and vacations. None of these decisions were irrational in isolation. Every single one made sense the day it was chosen. But together they form what's known as the fixed cost trap, a structure of recurring obligations so large and so locked in that almost the entire paycheck is already spent before it even arrives, leaving no room to absorb a bad month, let alone build wealth. This is the real mechanism behind the high-income poverty trap. It isn't one reckless purchase. It's 4 or 5 reasonable-sounding commitments stacked on top of each other until the income that should have created freedom instead gets fully consumed before it ever reaches a savings account. The paycheck arrives. The fixed costs are already waiting for it. And the cycle repeats, month after month, no matter how large the number on the direct deposit gets. Let's run the actual math, because numbers over 20 years hit very differently than numbers over 1 month. Scenario 1. Our marketing director, earning $165,000 a year, stays exactly on her current trajectory. She saves roughly 4%, consistent with the national average we covered earlier, which works out to about $6,600 a year invested. Assume a 7% average annual return, which is reasonable for a diversified stock portfolio over 2 decades. After 20 years, that consistent $6,600 a year grows to approximately $271,000. That's it. 2 decades of a 6-figure salary, and the result is less than 2 years of her current income sitting in an account. Scenario 2. Someone earning the exact same $165,000 a year, but who has identified and fixed the fixed cost trap. They downsize the vehicle, trim the subscription creep, and choose a home that's comfortably within the 28% housing guideline instead of stretching past it. The combined savings from those adjustments alone, conservatively, free up an additional $26,000 a year on top of the $6,600 they were already saving. That's $32,600 a year invested at the same 7% return. After 20 years, that number grows to approximately $1,336,000. Read that again. Same income, same starting point, same market returns. One person ends up with $271,000. The other ends up with $1,336,000. The gap between them is over $1,065,000, and the only variable that changed is what percentage of an identical paycheck got converted into assets instead of consumption. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The difference here has nothing to do with a better job, a side hustle, a lucky investment, or some secret the wealthy person knew that the other one didn't. It's entirely about the fixed cost trap from the last section, run forward across 2 decades of compounding. A relatively modest set of monthly adjustments, the kind that don't even require a pay cut or a lifestyle downgrade most people would notice day to day, produces a 7-figure difference by the time retirement starts coming into view. This is exactly why the high-income poverty trap is so dangerous. It doesn't announce itself as a crisis in year 1. It feels completely fine, month after month, paycheck after paycheck, right up until year 20, when one version of this person has financial freedom and the other is still living paycheck to paycheck on a 6-figure salary, wondering where all the money went. So here's the part most financial advice skips entirely, because it's the part that isn't comfortable to say out loud. Escaping the high-income poverty trap isn't a math problem you solve with a better spreadsheet. It requires a handful of genuinely uncomfortable choices, and pretending otherwise is why so many people stay stuck in it for decades. The first uncomfortable choice is driving a car that's worth less than what your coworkers drive. That's it. That's the choice. It sounds small until you're the one parking a 5-year-old sedan next to a coworker's leased SUV in the office lot, knowing exactly what that comparison feels like. The second is living in a smaller or less impressive home than your income could technically qualify you for, even when a lender is actively offering you more. Saying no to house size you can afford on paper is one of the strangest, most counterintuitive decisions in personal finance, and almost nobody does it voluntarily. The third is having a direct conversation with your kids about why private school isn't happening or why the family vacation looks different this year, and sitting in the discomfort of that conversation instead of avoiding it by charging the difference to a credit card. And the fourth, maybe the hardest one, accepting that some people in your life will quietly judge the downgrade. They'll notice the older car. They'll ask about the smaller house. There is a real social cost to stepping outside the lifestyle your income suggests you should have, and nobody talks about that cost honestly enough, even though it's often the actual reason people stay trapped long after they've seen the math. None of this is about deprivation. Nobody is asking you to live like you're broke. It's about whether every dollar leaving your account is leaving on purpose or just leaving on autopilot because that's what the income suggested you should be spending. Most people trapped in the high-income poverty trap never consciously chose it. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to spend their entire paycheck before it lands. They simply stopped asking, purchase after purchase, year after year, whether each expense was still worth what it was costing them. The trap isn't a single bad decision. It's the absence of a question that was never asked again after the first time. So before your next purchase, before the next upgrade that feels deserved or the next subscription that feels harmless, ask yourself the one question that separates the people who escape this from the people who don't. Is this choice something I actually intended, or is it just what happens when nobody's paying attention?